Go ahead. Leave me alone, you won't last 10 days without me, my wife said. I left the wedding ring on the table. The next morning her father shouted at her. The bank called. We have big debts. What have you done? A week earlier, everything still looked normal from the outside, the kind of normal that fools friends, parents, even the people living inside it. The apartment was clean, the bills were paid on time, and the wedding photo still sat on the shelf above the television, though it had been pushed slightly to the side, as if by accident. He noticed that detail one evening while turning off the lights, and it stayed with him longer than it should have. Small things had started to carry weight lately, like every quiet moment was hiding something underneath. He had been married to her for 6 years, long enough to know her rhythms, her moods, and the way she used to move through their shared life with intention. She once loved routines. Sunday breakfasts, late-night walks, texting him grocery lists with small jokes attached. Over the past few months, those habits faded quietly, without argument or explanation. Meals became rushed. Evenings became silent. Her laughter, once careless and frequent, now surfaced only when her phone lit up. The phone was always face down, always within reach. When it buzzed, her eyes moved faster than her hands, checking the screen before he could see it. She would answer messages with short replies and immediately lock the display again, as if closing a door. At first, he told himself it was work stress, or maybe boredom, or maybe just the natural distance that settles into long marriages if you stop paying attention. But he had been paying attention. That was the problem. He started noticing patterns instead of moments. She took her phone into the bathroom, something she never used to do. She charged it on her side of the bed, turned away from him. When he asked simple questions about her day, the answers came quickly and ended just as fast, like rehearsed lines. Somewhere along the way, their conversations stopped growing and started shrinking. He didn't accuse her. Not yet. Instead, he watched and remembered. He remembered how she used to leave her phone unattended, how she once laughed at the idea of secrets between them. He remembered the early years when money was tight and trust was the only thing they had plenty of. That memory made the current silence feel heavier, not lighter. There were financial changes too, subtle at first. Packages arrived that she claimed were returns or gifts for friends. Statements stopped being left on the kitchen counter. She insisted on handling certain payments herself, even though they had always managed money together. He didn't fight her on it, but he noticed. He always noticed. The night everything shifted, there was no argument, no shouting, just a sentence said with casual cruelty, the kind that only lands because it's spoken by someone who thinks they have already won. She told him to go ahead and leave if he was unhappy, told him he wouldn't last 10 days without her. She said it with confidence, almost amusement, as if daring him to fail. He didn't respond right away. He didn't raise his voice or defend himself. He simply went into the bedroom, removed his wedding ring, and placed it carefully on the table by the door. The sound it made was soft, barely audible but final. He walked out without packing a bag, without slamming the door, carrying only the certainty that something had already been broken long before that moment. That night, she slept alone in the apartment, confident and unbothered, scrolling through her phone in the dark. She believed the ring was a bluff. She believed he would come back. By morning, the bank had already started calling. The bank called just after 8 in the morning, the kind of call that cuts through sleep with urgency even before a word is spoken. She answered groggily, irritated more than concerned, expecting a routine confirmation or a delayed payment reminder. Instead, the voice on the other end carried a tone she wasn't used to hearing, firm and careful. The tone reserved for problems that had already grown beyond simple explanations. The account tied to their shared address was overdrawn far beyond its limit. Several payments had bounced overnight, and a credit review had been triggered automatically. She sat up in bed, suddenly alert, insisting there had to be a mistake. She dressed quickly and drove to her parents' house, convinced that a face-to-face conversation would fix whatever error had occurred. Her father was already awake, pacing the kitchen with his phone in hand, anger barely contained beneath confusion. The bank had called him too. He had co-signed years earlier when she was younger, back when trust felt simple and permanent. Now that trust felt heavier, almost fragile. He demanded answers she wasn't ready to give, and she responded with half-truths and impatience, brushing off details, insisting it was temporary. What she didn't know yet was that nothing about it was temporary. The man she had dared to leave had spent the night doing something she never imagined him capable of. Not out of rage, but out of clarity. He had suspected for months that she was hiding more than messages, and when he left the ring behind, he also left behind his willingness to protect her from herself. He didn't break into anything or steal information. He simply followed the same logic he had used his entire adult life, slow, methodical, and precise. Years earlier, when they merged finances for convenience, she insisted on managing a separate card for what she called personal flexibility. He agreed, trusting her explanation without question. That card had never been shared openly, but the account was tied to a shared address, a shared credit profile, and systems he understood better than she realized. That night, sitting alone in a quiet borrowed room, he accessed records he had the right to see. Not passwords guessed in anger, but permissions already in place, ignored only because trust had made them feel unnecessary. What he found wasn't just one card, but several lines of credit stacked carefully beneath optimism and secrecy. Purchases made in fragments, minimum payments masking maximum damage, debts rolled into new accounts to keep them invisible. Trips she claimed were work-related, gifts that never entered their home, charges that explained why traditions vanished and excuses multiplied. The betrayal wasn't only emotional. It was financial, deliberate, and growing. He didn't close accounts. He didn't freeze them. That would have been mercy. Instead, he did something quieter and far more permanent. He detached himself cleanly and legally, removing his financial buffer from her carefully balanced deception. Payments that had always been caught at the last second no longer were. Interest recalculated. Deferred balances surfaced. Automated systems did the rest without emotion or intent. He didn't impose the debt. He simply stopped hiding it. Back in her childhood kitchen, her father's voice rose with each new notification, each alert stacking on the last. The numbers no longer made sense. The confidence she had worn the night before was gone, replaced by a tightening panic she couldn't talk her way out of. She reached for her phone instinctively, flipping it face down again as if that habit could still protect her. Across town, the man she underestimated sat silently, already aware of every call she was about to receive. He didn't feel satisfaction yet, only resolve. And as her father demanded to know exactly what she had done, she finally realized that the 10 days she had promised him wouldn't survive the first morning. By the third day, the story had spread beyond the bank and her parents' kitchen. It moved the way uncomfortable truths always do, quietly but efficiently, carried through phone calls, worried relatives, and the tight concern of people realizing they might be pulled into something they didn't understand. Her father had stopped shouting and started calculating, which somehow felt worse. He sat at the table with printed statements, circling numbers in red, realizing how long this had been building without him noticing. Every circle felt like a failure, not just hers, but his. She tried calling her husband that afternoon. Once, then again. Each call went unanswered. When she finally left a message, her voice was smaller than she remembered it sounding, stripped of the confidence she once used like armor. She told him there had been a misunderstanding, that things had gotten out of hand, that they needed to talk like adults. She avoided the words betrayal and debt, as if naming them would make them permanent. He listened to the voicemail hours later, not out of cruelty, but because he had been busy doing something else she never thought he would do without her. He was meeting with an advisor, someone he had worked with years earlier when they bought their first car together. He explained everything calmly, without emotion or embellishment, laying out timelines and documents like pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense when viewed from a distance. There was no rush in his voice, only certainty. The advisor confirmed what he already knew. The debts were real. The liability was structured in a way that made accountability unavoidable. The card she thought was invisible was tied to decisions she alone had made. And now, without his financial support quietly absorbing the consequences, there was nothing left to slow the collapse. Nothing illegal had been done. Nothing malicious. He had simply stepped aside and let the truth stand on its own. Meanwhile, she was scrambling. She searched through drawers and old folders late into the night, looking for documents she might have hidden from herself, hoping to find some option she had forgotten. Her phone stayed in her hand, screen lighting her face again and again as messages went unanswered. The man she had been seeing stopped replying entirely once the situation became complicated. He had enjoyed secrecy, not responsibility. When consequences arrived, he disappeared. The apartment felt different without him. Not empty, but exposed. Bills sat unopened on the counter because opening them felt like admitting defeat. She replayed his silence in her mind, mistaking it for weakness, then for stubbornness, before finally understanding it for what it was. He wasn't avoiding her. He was finished protecting her. Her father made one last call on her behalf, swallowing his pride to ask questions he never expected to ask about his own daughter. The answers were polite and firm. There would be no extensions without payment. No forgiveness without accountability. When he hung up, he didn't look at her the same way. Not with anger, but with disappointment sharp enough to feel physical. Across town, the man she had underestimated walked past a jewelry store window and noticed his bare hand for the first time without pain. The absence of the ring no longer felt like loss. Felt like alignment. For the first time in months, his mind was quiet. And as her world continued to shrink under the weight of choices she could no longer hide, he knew the hardest part was still ahead, for both of them. The days that followed stretched into something heavier than time, a slow accumulation of pressure that never released, only shifted. Every morning she woke up with the same instinct to reach for her phone, not for comfort but for damage control, and every morning there was another notification waiting. Payment reminders stacked on top of one another. Interest recalculated itself with cold efficiency. What she once treated as background noise had become the loudest presence in her life. The secret credit card she believed was invisible now felt like an anchor tied to her name, dragging every other part of her life down with it. Her father stopped raising his voice altogether. That silence was worse. He moved through his house carefully when she was there, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing, but his disappointment leaked out anyway in the way he avoided eye contact and the way he reread statements he didn't need to reread. He finally understood that this wasn't a single mistake or a short lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, one she had hidden behind confidence and charm for years. When he asked how she planned to fix it, she had no answer that didn't rely on someone else stepping in. The apartment grew smaller each night. Without him there, the rooms didn't echo, they accused. The absence of everyday traditions became undeniable. No shared meals, no quiet routines, no small gestures holding the days together. She noticed how much of their stability had been built by him without announcement or praise. The utilities, the scheduling, the safety nets she never thought about because they always worked. She had mistaken his reliability for something permanent, something that didn't require respect. He, on the other hand, was experiencing a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Away from the apartment, away from the constant tension of unspoken doubt, his thoughts settled into order. He reviewed timelines and records again, not searching for reasons to feel angry, but to confirm that his instincts had been right all along. The financial trail matched the emotional one perfectly. The secrecy, the distance, the disappearance of shared habits, all of it aligned now. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt finished. She tried leaning on the person she had been seeing, only to discover how conditional that attention really was. Once the situation required patience, responsibility, or even presence, the replies slowed and then stopped entirely. The contrast was brutal. Where one man had quietly carried her weight for years, the other vanished at the first sign of consequence. That realization landed late at night, alone, with her phone lighting her face as messages went unanswered. Another letter arrived, this one formal enough to make her hands shake. The numbers were final. The tone was neutral. There would be no restructuring without proof of income she didn't have and no forgiveness without immediate action. She drove to her parents' house again, not with explanations this time, but with fear. Her father listened, nodded, and finally told her something she wasn't prepared to hear. He couldn't fix this for her. Not this time. Across the city, the man she once underestimated signed the last document that separated their lives completely. It wasn't dramatic. No ceremony. Just a pen moving across paper with steady certainty. When he finished, he felt lighter. Not relieved in the way movies promised, but grounded. The revenge she imagined he would take never came. Instead, he chose something quieter and far more devastating. He chose not to save her. That night, as she sat alone in the apartment scrolling through messages that no longer offered distraction or validation, she finally understood the depth of her miscalculation. She hadn't lost him because of anger. She lost him because he saw clearly. And for the first time since she dared him to leave, the weight of her own choices settled fully on her shoulders, with no one left to carry it for her. The real ending unfolded over months, not days, and it was heavier than anything she imagined when she mocked him that night. The debt did not disappear once it was acknowledged. It followed her into every decision, every conversation, every quiet moment when distractions ran out. She learned what it meant to live under numbers that didn't bend to emotion. Each paycheck she managed to secure was already divided before it arrived, portions spoken for by mistakes she could no longer deny or reframe. The secret credit card, once a symbol of freedom and control, became a lesson etched into every balance statement, reminding her that secrecy always charges interest. Her father remained present but distant, offering structure instead of rescue. He helped her understand repayment plans, deadlines, and legal realities, but he never reached for his wallet. That boundary was intentional. He wanted her to feel the weight fully, not as punishment, but as correction. Their relationship changed permanently. Where admiration once lived, there was now caution. Where trust once flowed freely, there was now verification. She felt that loss almost as sharply as she felt the end of her marriage, because it came from the same place, choices made without respect for consequence. The man she betrayed watched all of this from a distance he never closed. He heard updates through others, through fragments that reached him unintentionally, but he never engaged. He didn't correct rumors or defend his actions. He didn't need to. The truth had its own momentum now. What mattered to him was the life he was rebuilding deliberately, piece by piece, without secrecy, without tension, without the constant erosion of trust he once ignored in the name of peace. He found that his days grew quieter but stronger. His finances stabilized in a way they never had before, not because of increased income, but because nothing was leaking out through hidden channels anymore. He slept better. He trusted his instincts again. The suspicion that once haunted him had been replaced by understanding, and understanding brought closure. He recognized now that love without honesty is just maintenance, endless and exhausting, and that loyalty cannot exist where deception is practiced daily. For her, the realization came late and painfully. The man she thought would always catch her no longer existed in that role. The partner she assumed would absorb chaos without complaint had stepped aside, not to hurt her, but to survive her. That truth settled in slowly, during nights when the apartment felt too quiet and mornings, when responsibilities waited without mercy. She replayed the moment she dared him to leave, hearing her own confidence echo back with new meaning. She hadn't challenged his dependence. She had exposed her own. There was no dramatic apology scene, no final conversation that rewrote the ending. He never returned for closure because he didn't need it. He had already said everything with his actions. The ring on the table had been his final sentence, complete and unambiguous. It marked the moment he chose self-respect over endurance, clarity over comfort. Years later, she would look back on that morning when the bank called and understand it as the true beginning, not the end. The betrayal did not destroy her marriage. It revealed it. The revenge was never about humiliation or cruelty. It was about removing protection from dishonesty and allowing reality to respond naturally. Justice arrived not with anger, but with absence. Not with punishment, but with accountability. And the moral became unavoidable in the quiet aftermath. Love cannot survive where transparency is optional. Trust does not erode suddenly. It drains slowly through secrecy and entitlement. And the most powerful response to betrayal is not rage, But refusal to carry consequences that were never yours to begin with. The man who walked away did not take revenge with his hands. He did it with boundaries, and that made all the difference.